This episode of the Top Music Guitar Podcast is proudly supported by our sponsors, Music Notes. You're listening to the Top Music Guitar Podcast, the show for guitar teachers to learn about the craft of teaching great guitar lessons that students love. If you're looking to start or expand your studio and make guitar teaching your full-time dream job, you've come to the right place. Each week, you'll get to hear from some of the top guitar teachers from around the globe and get their best tips and experiences so you too can build your own dream studio. I'm your host, Michael, and I've founded one of the top guitar schools in Australia, written a best-selling curriculum, and I mentor guitar teachers. I'm excited to share my expertise with you and the wisdom of all the experts we interview. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Top Music Guitar Podcast. With me today, I got a real treat and a very, very special guest, a great friend of mine who I've known pretty much for most of my adult life and guitar playing life, who's someone I met on the very first day of university and have been great friends with ever since, and that is Simon Edgell, or as everyone knows him as Simo. Simo, welcome to the podcast.
G'day, Michael. Thanks for having me. It's a tremendous honour to be here.
So yeah, it's great to have you on the podcast finally. Simo's been, as I said, a really good friend, someone I've played in bands with, who I've studied alongside, who went on one hell of a USA trip with back in 2015, right before I started my business, and have always loved hanging out. We refer to him collectively as the dude as well, and anyone who's met Simo, and I'm sure some of the listeners have, knows exactly what we're talking about here. And, I've got my Aussie accent engaged right now, as tends to happen when we start talking with each other. So, yeah, there'll be lots of interesting language, and, Simo's a barrel of laughs, always great to have a good time with, and one hell of a guitar player to boot. So, someone who is almost like a bit of a big brother figure to me. I think you would have been 22, 23, you were a couple of years ahead of us when we started at university. Was that right?
Yeah, I think I was just shy of my 22nd birthday starting university. So, yeah, I'd care not to tell the listeners how old I am now, but it was a little while ago.
Yeah, a little while ago indeed.
Yeah, but you're too kind. It's certainly been a bit of a journey together. But I've loved every minute of it, and definitely appreciated our friendship and all the experiences and things we've had along the way. Yeah, so yeah, it's been awesome, man. But really glad to be here today, and look forward to our discussion.
Yeah, so we've got some really cool stuff planned for you, and of course, Simo, just to mention for all the top music people, did the 12-week How to Make a Full-Time Income course, and I think you did quite well. I think you basically doubled the amount of students you had and more than doubled the amount of income you had in that 12-month period. Was that correct?
I did. Absolutely. That's correct. Yes. I most certainly achieved what that 12-week course set out to do. And in fact, I probably achieved more than what I thought that would do. So yeah, I definitely got the full-time wage by the end of it, teaching part-time hours. And in fact, I probably got more than that. So yeah, couldn't recommend that 12-week course enough. If you're a Top Music member and you haven't done that course, you're 12 weeks away from full-time wage, part-time hours. It's as simple as that. It's good mathematics as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and it's a lot easier than what most people think. And, I throw numbers like, $100,000 around quite casually. Once upon a time, I thought that was completely unattainable. But, it's actually quite easy to do. And I know Simo is well on his way towards the next target, which isn't just a full-time income, but, a bit of a life of luxury in that six-figure target. But the reason I've invited Simo on, because he has a particular area of expertise, and is the fact that for as long as I've known him, he's always worked at a music shop up until very, very recently. We had a really big chain in Australia called Billy Hyde's Music at one point in time, and then became an even bigger chain when it partnered with the other big chain, Allen's Music, for Allen's Billy Hyde. And Simo's sort of always been in the flagship store there down at Blackburn, and then getting moved around to a few various points, including the original location and my first store where I bought my very first guitar when it turned into GH managed music. So Simo's always heavily involved in music retail, and being a teacher and a great player and a music retailer, he's got some great inside knowledge of ways you can negotiate better deals for your students or even yourself, for educating your parents and students on the benefits of, purchasing really good equipment. And I'm sure a wealth of other, great little insights and tidbits, and maybe even some cool stories that we don't always get to hear about from, the retail world there. So Simo, why don't you just, in your own words, give us a bit of a background about your guitar playing journey so far?
Yeah, sure. So, ironically, I've nearly been working in music shops as long as I've been playing guitar. Sort of try to keep this reasonably brief, but I'll start at the start. So I was roughly just shy of my 15th birthday, saw my cousin playing guitar, and I thought, wow, that looks pretty cool. I'm pretty excited to be having a go at that. And my parents bought me a guitar for my 15th birthday. Shortly in year 10, I did work experience at school, and the one place that I thought I'd do work experience, that I would love to do work experience at, was the local music store. So I grew up in a country New South Wales town called Wagga Wagga, New South Wales. Shout out to Wagga Wagga in the Riverina area. So yeah, I started as a guitar player at 15. I was obsessed with it, like most teenagers are when they find out about guitar and rock music and things like that. And so essentially, I'm going to sort of incorporate my retail history at the same time as my musical history here, just to sort of save on some time. But yeah, so I did work experience at the local music shop. Shout out to Allison Music in Wagga, Dale Allison, fantastic bloke, and gave me an opportunity which probably changed my life. Yes, I did work experience for a week. I did more than just cut up the boxes. I actually had a go at selling a pedal to a customer, and I did that. And at the end of my week of work experience, Dale said, "Do you want a job?" I said, "Absolutely." So it took a little while for an opening to come up, but I was at the top of his list. And essentially I started working in music retail, Thursday night, late night trade. And from there, I started playing in cover bands around Wagga when I was 18, old enough to play at pubs. And I sort of had a bit of a desire to be a better musician than just a cover band player. And I started getting lessons from probably the most influential teacher I've ever had, a gentleman by the name of Damien Evans, probably still the smartest bloke I know about music theory, and quite honestly, one of the best musicians I've ever seen. Plays a bass player, but he actually started learning guitar to be able to teach me about jazz theory and whatever. In the event that I would go and audition to get a spot at a university doing a Bachelor of Music, where I happened to meet a gentleman by the name of Michael Gumley, who needs no introduction. But so my time in Wagga led me down to Melbourne, where I studied a Bachelor of Music with Michael, as we mentioned in the top of the intro. At this point in time, I obviously left my job at the music shop in Wagga. And when I moved down to Melbourne, my boss in Wagga, Dale, actually, at that point, he was actually sort of like a franchise. I use the inverted commas there for the people who can't see me, but he had an opportunity to be sort of bannered under the Billy Hyde brand, but he was still his own business. Going down to Melbourne, I asked Dale if, he knew anyone, and he kind of put in a good word for me with the manager of the time at Blackburn location of Billy Hyde's music store, which was definitely the biggest music instrument retail chain. I think it was something like 27 stores around the country. Yeah, he put in a good word for me there. And within my sort of first week of moving down to Melbourne of university study, I had a job working back in music stores, which was great because I got to meet some local musos, and also, having a job at university is a good thing. Anyway, from there, I've finished uni and kind of went on to do a few more things in the musical instrument retail space, worked in wholesale for a little while. But essentially, I've been music retail close enough. I think it was pretty close to 20 years before I sort of stopped working in retail and started, doing my music school full time. But I actually was thinking about this morning before we had a chat, and I worked in a pizza shop as a teenager. I did like maybe 6 months working for my dad doing some data entry stuff, and I did maybe a few months working in a call center. Aside from that, I've always been involved in music retail, whether it be instrument stores. I did CD shops for a little while too when I was a teenager, but predominantly music instrument retail. So I've certainly seen a lot of things, learned a lot of things, heard a lot of things, met a lot of great people, customers and colleagues. And here I am today teaching in my music school, teaching guitar, and loving every minute of it.
Yeah, and it seemed like, the businesses you're involved in just seem to have like bad occurrence or bad mismanagement, or, shut down, got bought out. There's just a misfortune after misfortune. You always ended up in the new version or the new iteration or at the next store as it was saved, and they sort of cut back certain staff but kept on the essentials. So you always seem to be at the right place at the right time in terms of that transition through the corporate world.
Yeah, look, luckily, I think I was a pretty good employee, so I usually got a ticket on the new bus. We'll say that much. But there was a bit of a period of time where that landscape of the biggest instrument franchise in Australia kind of went through some shaky times, and now there are other players, big players in that space. But I suppose I got a bit of a reputation of being pretty good at my job, and I did enjoy being around gear all day, and even though it was a retail job, it was nice to be sort of in that space. You could be selling worse things, I suppose.
That's it. And a lot of the, that's the dream job for most musicians. If you're working at a music retail shop and gigging at night, that's obviously one of the more desirable kind of career paths, or at least it was, from age like 18 all the way up to 25, up until the music teaching took off. And it's, a very viable option for a lot of people as well.
Oh, absolutely. I think if you might get a lot of different answers if you ask that question to a lot of different people, but to be honest, it's definitely a great, viable option for people, who want to be able to sort of gig at night and work during the day. But then, of course, you gig on weekends and you work on weekends. And so it is a retail gig at the end of the day, but it can have its advantages. Cheap gear was definitely cheap equipment was, staff discount was definitely one of those things early on in the piece. But yeah, it was definitely a bit of a journey for sure, but hell of a ride.
Most definitely. Now, one of the cool things is obviously getting to touch and interact with and play with all the gear. And that's something which, I wanted to ask you about is obviously as musicians, we can often know our own value and benefit of having really good gear, but communicating that to our students or their parents can be a bit of a challenge. So how important is it having good musical instruments and equipment to work with?
How long did you say we have this podcast for? How long does this? No, I'm just joking. Trying to 20. I spent 20 years just about trying to tell people the importance of having good instruments, musical equipment. Look, in all seriousness, it's to be blunt, it's super important to have good gear, good equipment, good instruments. Everyone sort of knows you get what you pay for. But sometimes what you can spend doesn't necessarily meet in the middle with what you would like, and as teenagers, we all wanted the great guitar, but our parents were probably reluctant to spend the money that guitar was. So you just sort of navigate as best you can to try and meet in the middle there somewhere. But I think it's always good to strive for the best possible gear that you can get. And it's also worth pointing out that don't always strive for the best possible deal. Now, that's something we'll talk about a little bit later, but the best possible outcome is always subjective and situational. But the one thing that I sort of always said in my experience of retail was the more you spend now, the less you spend later. And to a lot of people, that may not necessarily make sense. And there'll be probably a lot of musicians who have lived for 20, 30 years of their musical life and said, well, I probably find I'm spending more now, but I suppose it's justified. But in the early days, to spend that little bit more to get that better guitar or amp or whatever it might be, whether it be even a drum kit or a saxophone, or it could be anything, it's going to mean that, you're going to save a bit of money in terms of upgrading, because at some point you are going to outgrow that instrument or that amp, in which case, the mathematics of it is you've spent the amount of money to get the first thing, but then, of course, you outgrow that quickly. So then you have to sort of essentially find the same amount of money you spent on the first one plus the money to go into the next sort of, bracket or tier of equipment, in which case, I guess if you can sort of make that initial jump straight away, then essentially you haven't sort of spent that initial amount in the first place, and you've already got a better instrument. And of course, having a better instrument to learn on has obvious advantages and that sort of stuff. So for me, that's the sort of, I guess the underlying reason as to why, I think a lot of the time in my sales approach, I would use that analogy. But to me, it should be obvious that having good gear is important for learning, for a multitude of reasons. But like I said at the start of that explanation, what you can spend and what you want, it's always two different things, right?
Always align. No,
I'm sure.
And nose up against the glass cabinet, like, that's the one I want.
Yeah, look, we'd all like to have an acre block and 2-story house, 5 bedrooms with the pool and the spa and all that sort of stuff, but you can't always get that right, particularly not in Melbourne.
Yeah, that's it. Oh, don't get us started on that.
Real estate's a different topic.
The whole other idea is, you essentially want to get the best you can within your budget to avoid having to upgrade later. And the last thing you want is your student going out and buying a piece of junk guitar, and then, not only does it make it harder to play, it sucks the motivation out of it, maybe even hurts their fingers. And then if they do persevere with it, then you've got to upgrade them again in 6 months' time or 12 months' time. Whereas if you just go straight for the good one and you get that from the beginning, not only is it easier to play, which is going to make them sound better and feel better, they're going to pick it up way quicker, and they're going to be motivated to pick it up. And, the whole range of benefits that come with getting good gear that inspires you to pick it up more and facilitates great playing. And then, you either, option A is you don't need to upgrade, or option B is because you get so good and so involved in the hobby, you end up just 30 years and 30 guitars later you have quite the collection. But
absolutely, yeah, look, you don't you don't want to know how many guitars I acquired with staff discount being an incentive over the years. But yeah, look, it's really as simple as that. The better the gear, the easier it is to play, the more you pick it up. That should realistically be the most important factor to buying equipment, before the price, before, what it looks like. Or we'll get into that later, of course, too. But yeah, it's super. I couldn't, like I said, how long do you want me to talk about this for? That's this is a very, very important part of the process that people overlook, I think.
Yeah. And how do guitar teachers pass on that knowledge to their parents? How do they persuade or advise the parents of their students to go out and invest in a good instrument, or the students themselves, if it's a bit of an older student who's like, oh yeah, I'll go get a cheap guitar? Like, how do we educate them on this topic of you need good gear and you should invest a little bit more up front?
Yeah, look, it's a bit of a $64,000 question, that one. Pretty much furthermore to what I said a little earlier about, like upgrading over a period of time can be an expensive venture, as opposed to, sort of stretching that little bit further to probably make a bit more of a front of budget to kind of secure yourself something that's better. In the long run, you will definitely save a bit of money. And I suppose, to answer your question, how do we communicate that to parents? Well, money is definitely a big factor for parents, of course. I think if it's somebody, say an older student, as you mentioned, it's a bit easier to explain to them the advantage of investing in themselves and investing in the equipment. I never really had a lot of trouble explaining that to people. And like I said, sometimes you just simply can't afford to go, to the level that you'd like, but there's definitely a compromise or a middle ground that's a suitable option. But when you explain to parents that, making that jump initially can save a bit of money in the long term, I think more often than not, that's enough to get them over the line to consider maybe making a bit more of a jump to a better guitar or amp. And then, of course, I always used to say to them too, like if you spend more now, the less you spend later, probably by the time they're ready to get the next piece of gear, they got their own job. In which case, the parents go, hey, you know what? I never thought about like that. Yeah, I did learn a thing or two over 20 years of selling, but yeah. So I guess to sum that up, that's probably the best way to kind of go. There are a few other sort of things too, but yeah, and actually, given the fact that I used to be on that side of the fence as a sales assistant, and now I'm, coming at from a music school teacher owner point of view, that advice still hasn't changed. I tell, now I've just saved the sales assistant a bit of oxygen by kind of preparing the student, the parent or the student before they go into the store. So, and one other thing I'll add to that too is you don't always have to start on an acoustic guitar.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. That's like, if there was one sort of little thing that I went out to
call it an injustice.
Yeah, it's a bit of one sort of record I went out to set straight, I think initially from day one, was that you don't always have to start on an acoustic guitar, because I actually did not start on an acoustic guitar. I said to my parents, well, they said, we're going to buy you a guitar. We're going to get you an acoustic guitar. And I was like, you know what? Don't even bother. If it's acoustic, I'm not interested. If it's an electric, I'll learn, I'll be happy. And they were like, oh, no, but you've got to start on acoustic. And I was like, I don't think you do, to be honest. And I actually use this whole, if you get me an acoustic now, that's only going to become redundant, in which case then we're going to have to fork out for an electric and an amp. So from day dot, that I've lived by that advice. So let me tell you, that's, it's good advice.
Yeah, 100%. And I call that one the Father Christmas myth. It's like, oh yeah, little Billy's like given up 3 activities already this year. Hey, all right, we don't want to buy an electric guitar. So they buy him like a total piece of junk acoustic from Aldi.
Yeah.
I love shopping at Aldi, but I'd never buy a guitar from them. And
that's right.
That's not where you take your bargains where they don't matter, and spend your money wisely where it matters, because you do get what you pay for. That's one of the other things I like saying. You get what you pay for at the end of the day with your equipment and your lessons. So make sure you invest in a quality teacher, and that's a line you guys can pinch for yourselves as well. But I just say, there's this myth and misconception that we'll start you off an acoustic, and if you practice all year, you still like it at the end of the year, then we'll invest a little bit more into upgrading you to an electric guitar. Whereas I'm like, well, do they listen to primarily electric-based music or acoustic-based music? If it's electric-based music, then let's get them straight on electric guitar, because it'll be easier for them to play, especially because they don't have to squeeze as hard. The neck's a little bit thinner. It'll sound exactly like they want it to. And once again, when they sound like their favorite artist and we just press a button and we have distortion, all of a sudden you got your rock sound. That is so motivating and so inspirational for so many of your students of any age, because it makes it feel and sound like the real thing. So that's where starting on electric is an advantage over acoustic in many instances, because you can make it sound exactly like the real deal pretty much straight away, even if they're just doing a single melody. The other day I was trying to teach some 6-year-olds how to do power chords, and it wasn't quite working with half of them. I thought, oh, you know what? I'll just put the octave pedal on, and then I just set it down to a 5th, and all of a sudden we had power chords off a single string, instant Green Day. So it was awesome.
Yeah, I beg anybody to find me a better facial expression than watching a young person see the distortion switch go on for the first time. You know what I mean? Like they're sitting, listening to this clean guitar, and then you hit that switch, and then all of a sudden this sound comes out of the amplifier, and their eyes just go, what the hell is this? It's kind of, there's a few.
Not just children, it happens with 45-year-old adults.
Absolutely it does. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I've quite often heard you say a lot of the time, we get older, but we don't necessarily grow up. And I think in terms of listening to loud music, that's definitely one of them. But it could be any sound, And
that's a good little segue back to the how do you educate your students and your clients on getting good gear? when you're getting those, 45-year-old dad rockers who've always wanted to play guitar or tried it 20 years ago and had to give it up for whatever reason, sometimes, they've got money and they've got disposable income now. So you can send them down to the shop and they'll come back with probably spend about $1,200. Yeah, maybe you've convinced me. And they come back with a $4,000 Les Paul the next week and you're like, whoa, there we go. That shows they're committed. But sometimes your clients don't know what to spend or how much to spend. And I think a bit of a discussion about price points, saying, hey, Holden or whatever car brand makes like a couple of different tiers, one for every budget. Anything under $200, you're probably in the, I'm talking Australian here, but anything $200, you're very entry level, if not the junk level. 200 to 400, you got something okay, but you're probably better off going straight to 600 to 800. $800 to $1,200, that's your hobbies guitar sorted. Unless you've got professional ambitions or you're going to be playing a fair bit, you don't really have to go past $1,200 unless, you got the money to burn or you do like really good gear and want to invest into it. And then, anything above $1,200, around about the $2,000 mark, that's where you got the professional level stuff. And upwards of that, you're pretty much paying for brands or specific, promotional items, special edition things, or sometimes, labor and things like that. And, is the the $2,000 Gibson and the $6,000 Gibson $4,000 different? Not really. They're probably like, most of the time you're paying for the name and the edition, but 80% of the hardware is the same, just maybe a few different paint jobs and things like that. So, you can definitely waste money and go the other direction on guitars, which aren't going to translate instantly into playing. But, the age-old question, we might throw this one your way out of nowhere. Does buying a new guitar make you a better player, Simo?
Wow. That's a great question.
Now we're just going to pause the interview for a second, guys, for a quick message from our wonderful sponsors at Music Notes. So teachers and students everywhere deserve a sheet music experience that impresses, and that's precisely what you get from musicnotes.com, the largest online retailer of quality sheet music. Now it's all about the attention to detail with Music Notes because they're run by musicians for musicians. So Music Note hold every piece in their catalog to the highest standard for the best experience, whether it's in the practice room right up to the performance. Now, Music Notes has the perfect arrangement for every musician and every purchase is available right away. There's no shipping, they never run out of print, and the transcriptions are always available in the right key. So simply print from the Music Notes website or use the free Music Notes app to view your sheet music anywhere, anytime. And as an exclusive to our listeners, Music Notes are offering 25% off e-gift cards for a limited time only. So visit musicnotes.com/topmusic to claim this very special exclusive offer, and there's no code required.
I'm going to say it does. I'm not going to say that you should go out and buy a new guitar every day to become a better guitar player every day, but I think there are moments in time along your guitar playing journey where it's appropriate for you to go and purchase a guitar that's going to make you a better player. And I think that, there are definitely guitars out there. Like you mentioned just a minute ago, the one thing that I noticed from when I first started working in music retail to probably, my sort of later days was this sort of shift happened where manufacturers started making guitars for every single dollar value that you could think of because they didn't want to miss out on a market opportunity, so hence the reason why there is a $200 to $400 option. There is a $400 to $600 option. There is once upon a time, a brand might have only had a $300 option, and then it might sort of skip to like a $700 or $800 option. And just with the way that I think possibly one of the greatest things to ever happen to, music instruments was sort of China and, potentially manufacturing guitars and things in those places. Those places got better at manufacturing. And as a result, they were able to be able to build guitars to price points, which made guitars more accessible. And as in turn, we can get more guitars in hands. And I think that's a really important thing to happen. But yeah, I guess to answer the question, I think on some level, the answer to that question is yes. Purchasing a new guitar does make you a better player. I remember, like I started on a cheaper electric guitar. I couldn't tell you how much it was, but I bought something slightly better, and that got me to a point in time where I was, sort of younger, not quite 18, but maybe 16, 17. I obviously had a job. I saved up all my money. I bought myself an Epiphone Les Paul, and that was like the first real guitar that I bought, $1,200-ish. And it made a huge difference in my journey and my playing. I would, it really inspired me and really lit a fire, I think, underneath me to go that next level. And then, of course, that turned into a American-made Fender Strat, and I could probably list the other. I'm not going to maybe say on air how many guitars I've got in case my wife's listening, but
just hold up fingers.
Yeah. So it's a great question. But I think the answer is
it's worth just tapping into something you mentioned there. Was it lit a fire under you, and that's the key thing. Is obviously if you buy a better guitar, it facilitates better playing. And buying different guitars. So if you don't have a 12-string and then you go out and buy a 12-string guitar or a 7-string or something which allows you to do a couple of things you didn't, that promotes growth. And of course, as we said, a better guitar, which is going to make things a little bit easier, is going to help you become a better player. But the most important thing is the inspiration you get. So if you're playing an hour a day and then all of a sudden you go out and buy a new guitar and you play it for 3 hours a day for the next 2 weeks, that promotes so much growth in your playing. And that growth, because it pays off so quickly because you're doing it so frequently, all of a sudden you get this little boost and go, oh, hang on, I'm actually feeling better and playing better and sounding better. Then all of a sudden the wife or the girlfriend or whoever it is walks past the door and goes, oh, that sounds really good actually. And I think there's a really definitive moment with most learners where either someone else in the household goes, oh, hang on, that actually sounds really good, or hang on, are you playing this song? And that can be a huge point when someone finally goes, oh, they recognize a song, or I got my first compliment, or things like that. And often getting that new guitar, which promotes that first little spark of motivation to pick it up a lot more, can be the catalyst in causing that to happen. So yeah, as you said, should we go out and buy a new guitar every week to try and use that as a way to get better? Probably not. But if you're intermittently rewarding yourself with a new guitar, or every now and then you upgrade, or if you've got money to collect guitars and that's your thing, I always say, what's the equation? Something like however many pairs of shoes your wife has, you divide by 6 and multiply by 4 or something like that. And that's how many guitars you're allowed to have, or something like that. But yeah, if buying guitars is the thing that motivates you, and you always get a big boost immediately after doing one, as long as you can pay your rent and feed your children and clothe yourself and pay your bills, and you got cream on top to spend on guitars, go for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the other important stakeholder that you might have missed in that list of people are parents too. If parents can walk past a bedroom and hear something like and go, holy hell, that sounds great. Like, I can't believe that's my kid doing that in there. Then of course there should be an opportunity to be there. All right, well, we should really try to invest in this as much as possible, because there's not many people on the planet, unlike teenagers, they've got the most amount of free time to practice guitar. Teenagers, if you're listening to this, it never gets any easier to play guitar at your age, because as soon as you finish school, you have responsibilities and it goes out. I have my teenage students all the time say, oh man, I can't wait to finish school. And I remind them, I say, a lot of them haven't seen Billy Madison, but I remind them of that Billy Madison quote, don't ever say that again. You don't understand what it's like when you leave school. So if we can put better instruments in the hands of teenagers when they have all that disposable time to sit and play for hours on end, goodness me, I think we'd have some really, really great guitar players at younger ages. Be a different place, I think, different landscape. Be interesting times, of course. But yeah, if that's
even
one
to extend that back to kids and say, if we put some more electric guitars in the hands of kids and got them playing what they liked, as opposed to, and this isn't a knock on classical music or anything like that, but so many people are really out of touch with what their teachers are playing them, or they just want to rock or just want to shred, and they're being forced to sight read and do all those kind of things. But if you can put electric guitars in their hands or get them playing along to pop and contemporary music and ignite that spark of inspiration so much earlier on in the process, we don't want them persevering for 6 years, then becoming teenagers, then getting to electric guitar, and then, hitting the woodshed kind of thing. If we can get that happening very, very early on in the process, because students fall in love with it, it can be an absolute game changer for your students and the parents and the family. And, we create a worldwide kick-on effect because of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And look, I suppose, definitely not a knock on classical guitar or nylon string guitars or acoustic guitars or anything like that. But just sheerly from a point of view of like electric guitars are, they're actually kinder for smaller bodies, that like, for kids, that is. You don't have to put your arms all the way around it. And the tension of the strings, it's actually easier to play an electric guitar. And there's not many of my students who don't own an electric guitar. They have acoustics as well for the sound and the functionality that instrument brings, but they come to lessons with an electric guitar because it's easier to play. It's much more comfortable to sit with whilst they're learning. And once you've got those skills, then you can adapt to, different instruments, guitars, whatever that might be, right? So, I guess I suppose we don't want to sort of bash on the acoustic guitar thing too much, but yeah, it should be more accepted as a place to start than what it is in a simple matter.
Yeah, and I think if the price point was the same, we'd find a huge number of people swapping to electric. But speaking of gear, what are some essential music equipment items and gear items that teachers should have in their studio? Because you obviously sell to consumers as a general. What are some of the things you'd be recommending other teachers have in their studios, either for themselves or to use with their students?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. I think a lot of it depends situationally, what type of school or academy you might be, working in, the students, the location of such a thing. I guess the basic sort of stuff like, music stands and nice, comfortable stools. I actually recommend drum stools for music teachers. I use drum stools because a lot of them can be easily adjustable. You can get ones that are on like a screw thread that you just, you turn the top of the stool to adjust it to the height, because I teach adults and I teach teenagers and I teach kids and they're different heights. So that's an easy way to make it more comfortable. They are going to sit in it for an hour, so you do want to make them feel comfortable when they're there. So drum stools are a great one that I think a lot of people overlook. Of course, you've got music stands, you've got footstools, that sort of stuff. But I suppose if you're teaching electric guitar, having great little practice amps is probably non-negotiable. You want to make the experience. I listened to the podcast you did with the guy at Stanton Island, and I can't remember his name. Stanton Island School of Music.
Oh, not Mike Grande.
That's it. Rock Out Loud. Yeah, that guy. And that was a fascinating. If you haven't listened to that, go and listen to that, because what I'm about to say definitely backs on to what Mike was saying. And that is, you've got to make the experience something special when they go there. So if you're teaching electric guitar, have great little practice amps. You don't have to, they're not expensive these days, like a couple of $100 can get you a great sounding practice amp. And, and then you can show the parents that this little unit that sounds so fantastic that the student loves is only a couple of $100. Like it all starts somewhere, and I think that that's a great opportunity to do that. But yeah, good amps. I guess I don't know, like great.
I'll just jump in there, and the fact that your three biggest companies for amps within that kind of studio practice amp size kind of things, your Line 6, your Black Star, and your Boss. They're all just trying to outcompete each other. So just keep putting bigger and better features into smaller and smaller amps that are increasingly less of a price. And I was telling someone the other day, it was either 2008 or 2009, I bought the top of the range Line 6 for about $2,000. It was it was an awesome amp, but that same thing is now down to $250, $300 with the upgraded software and technology, and it's gone from literally what used to cost you $2,000 10 years ago or just over is literally a $250, $300 thing. So it's oh man, in one way it hurts so much to see. And even the fact that, what you can get at home for $1,000 and record in your bedroom sounds better than what a $200,000 recording studio back in the 60s, 70s, 80s used to cost to set up. So the change in the technology and the evolution of the technology and the hardware and the equipment is absolutely mind-blowing. And it's, never been a better time to be a guitar player in terms of the kind of gear you have access to.
Couldn't agree more. And I actually think, I'm just going to go back a little bit, but I've got a sneaking suspicion I might have sold you that Line 6 amp in 2009. Anyway.
I think that was just before your time, that one. You did sell me a very, very good Edgell amp, and yeah, that's a ripper. I still got that one there.
But to go back to what your point about the practice amps, man, yeah, the technologies since 2009, goodness me, the things that, the sounds and the sort of stuff you can get now even has changed a lot. But it was massive back then. I remember the music shop in Wagga seeing those little practice amps for the first time where they were emulating classic sounds and stuff like that. And they were probably a little bit more expensive, but of course, after that, they all started to get manufactured in places where they could make them more affordable. And then you combine that with the technology and the competition, and what you have is, essentially a great resource for young beginning guitar players, or any guitar player that's starting out, to get access to great sounds for not a lot of money. I mean, they're all competing, just like with the guitars, they're all making them for those price points. So $200 amps back when I started learning guitar, they wouldn't even compare to the sorts of things you could buy for $200 now. And
I mean,
quite
what
honestly,
we used to get for $200, you could probably make in like electronics class.
Absolutely, yeah.
With a box and a speaker and a little bit of circuitry.
But the thing, quite honestly, too, when I was talking at the top of the podcast about the fact that, investing early, if you bought yourself a really good $200 bedroom practice amp, quite honestly, that thing could last you a lifetime. You may never, ever have to buy another good, because it's going to be, it's going to give you a range of sounds. For example, I've got thousands of dollars of amplifiers stashed away. I hope my wife's still not listening to this part of the episode, but I do. But I guarantee you, the one thing that I plug into nearly every day is my $300-$400, bedroom practice amp, because it's always there. It's convenient. It's easy. It's got lots of sounds. It sounds great. It inspires me. And it's ironic, you know what I mean? The only time I use my other amplifiers is when I go and play in venues, and I need specific tonal characteristics. But yeah, I tell that to students, and, I think for $200 now, you could have an amp that lasts you a lifetime, as opposed to getting something that, is not, and then having to spring for more later on down the track. And it's only power really that you need to spend more money on later, when you need to be louder, if you competing against drum kits and things like that. Yeah.
And full disclosure, I'm an official Line 6 licensee, and I use my Helix and the new power cab for almost everything. But I think there's a new amp coming out called the Catalyst, and it's pretty much the same technology, but so instead of paying $2,000 for a Helix, you're going to get the same technology, or a certain amount of it scaled down to a bedroom practice amp. And that's, I think, priced at about $400. And I am first on the queue to get one of those. I cannot wait to get me one of them. And the only difference is I'll have to flick one switch instead of two, and it will be, one unit in combo rather than two separate units. I'm so excited about it. It's not going to be, or it potentially might be better. I haven't actually looked all that much into it. I just saw the picture, said that looked pretty cool. $400. Wow, that is really, really kind of cool. And it sort of has all the stuff, which again, they put in the tone modeling now, scaled down to a combo amplifier. So I'm like, I'm going to get one for me and maybe another 8 for the studio to set up. So that's how it goes.
And to be honest, man, I am a bit of a Line 6 nerd, geek, fanboy. And they never cease to amaze me with the sort of, and I actually have no affiliation with Line 6 for full disclosure either, but I'll never forget the first time I ever saw a Line 6 amp and the sort of things that it did. And I was obsessed, and I bought a Pod XT Live for all those other not Line 6 nerds out there, or a Pod XT Live, and just thought, wow, like the stuff that this thing can do and the functionality that I can get out of it and the sounds. And yeah, and I was hooked ever since. And, part of our friendship when we did our big trip was, as you may remember, we actually went to the Line 6 factory, and it was a whole, what we thought was cool with just the gear itself. When we actually saw the sort of stuff that goes on behind the scenes and how they make that, and how that technology really is first class. And be honest, there's, other like companies like Boss and Blackstar are doing similar things, but Line 6 were really the pioneers, I feel, of that whole space. And they're the ones that possibly changed the game forever. And going to HQ and, sort of behind the scenes to see that stuff, those like scientist kind of nerd dudes like working on, it was great. It was a great experience. But yeah, it's really changed the game.
Yeah, I'll have to see if we can dig up some photos to put on the post about this episode as well, because it was a really, really cool. Out of all the factories, I think we went to about 9 different guitar factories around about LA back in 2015, and that one was my number one. And I think Schecter, like back in then, I just thought Schecters were. I don't want to trash out their brand, but I don't think many people thought much of Schecters from 2005 to 2010. And then when I went to the factory in 2015, I was like, man, out of all the factories we've been to, guitar specifically, this is hands down the best one. And they've completely turned around their quality and making everything. But I'll stop talking about gear because we do have a couple of other questions we want to get to. But in terms of how to get good deals, how can a music teacher build a relationship with a local store and go into bat for their students and take care of all parties involved?
Sure. So there's from the very, very top, the 2 words that I'll start with are be nice. Manners will get you a long way. And retail staff go through a lot. They definitely do. It's a known fact. There are even advertisements on TV, like, public service announcements about like treating, retail workers with respect. So you never know what that person's experienced that day. So being nice will get you a very long way straight off the bat. That's my piece of advice number 1. Secondly, you want to build a relationship. It's all about building a relationship. I actually think that finding a great, music shop sales assistant is just like having a good mechanic. A lot of people don't know anything about cars. They need them, right? And of course, I'm using this analogy because it's much more relatable to, to everybody who most people have a car, right? So, something goes wrong with your car, you take it down to the mechanic. If he's a good mechanic and you trust him, you know that like he's going to look after you because you're loyal to him, et cetera, et cetera. People get nervous about taking their cars because they don't know if the mechanic's going to fleece them and he's going to give them all this jargon and all this sort of stuff to whatever. So, building a great relationship with somebody in a music shop definitely has a similar sort of validity to the mechanic. For me personally, when I've found a great mechanic, they're like gold. I get nervous about moving house because I'm going to have to find a new mechanic. And it's the same with. I think there's a lot of parallels there with music shop guys. So I've met some fantastic people. Some of my customers ended up becoming great friends, because I guess there was a lot of trust in me, and you have to sort of respect that trust as a sales assistant too, to sort of go, it's about making sure you get the right thing that's right for you, really catering to that. I think a lot of other people have this sort of stigma thinking that music shop guys might be like car salesmen and things like that, which is couldn't be any further from it. But being nice, firstly, do the best you can to build a relationship and try to, find that person that you can trust their advice and their opinion of. I actually looked up the definition of a deal, and for all those playing along at home, the definition is an agreement entered into by 2 or more parties for their mutual benefit, especially in a business or political context. Now, how does that relate to what we're talking about here? The sales guy is always going to be trying to get you the best. He's going to do his job by selling you gear, right? He needs to put money in the till there to justify his employment. But the one thing he doesn't want to do is he doesn't want to have to necessarily, I know for me personally, I didn't want to have to sort of deal with people coming back with things and being like, this doesn't do what I want it to do and all that sort of stuff. So if you build that trust with that person and that person understands you and you understand them, that definitely saves time for both of you, and I think that's a really important thing in terms of, the money that's spent at that point in time as well. But I used to be of the opinion that I would make sure that whatever item I was selling to a customer, that they knew that this was my, with all my expertise and advice, that this was the best thing for them. And if they wanted to do differently, then that was up to them. But I think if you, as a sales assistant, if you have that sort of ethos about you, then, you're going to have great customers, and great customers, equals, spending money with you. So like I said, that with the definition there, it's a two-way street, right? But the best way to go about having, both parties interested in the deal front is making sure that you have a great relationship with, your music shop. So be nice, build a good relationship with someone, and a good deal is all about perception, but it's not always. They're gonna look after you as best they can, and if you get great service, to me that's a good deal. Advice can be priceless. So do with that what you will. But I think, good music shops are like good mechanics. If you find one, hang on to them. They'll look after you too, and of course, in turn, you'll look after them.
Fantastic advice there. Now, unfortunately, and I feel like I could talk for, another hour, but we do have to wrap things up here. So, Simo, if you could impart one final bit of advice. Now, this could be guitar playing advice, it could be teaching advice, it could be, again, music retail advice. What's one last bit of wisdom you can impart on our listeners today?
I can't believe that time's actually gone as quickly as it has. And there's definitely more I would like to talk to you about on this subject. But to leave you with something today, I actually think I've been thinking about this a lot recently. I was talking to a luthier, and I've been talking to a few other people, and I really feel like, as sort of teachers and music shops, if you're listening to this, I feel like we need to all do better to help cultivate the next generation. Where I think everybody's losing a battle to the internet, right? Teachers themselves are losing a battle to the internet somewhat. Music instrument retailers are definitely losing a battle to the internet as well. But I feel like we need to do better to try to cultivate that. So those experiences, just like Mike touched on when he talked about building the experience in the school, it should definitely be the same thing for the music store, because it is the candy shop that every kid wants to go to when they've discovered the sweet taste of those lollies, right? And I think that it's, and I could even go into more detail about that, but just sort of music teachers helping, building relationships and sort of allegiances with music shops, and having music shops help music teachers is only going to benefit both of those people, because ultimately it's a long-term game, right? We know that learning music takes time, and also as businesses, returning customers over long periods of time are definitely profitable aspects. So if we can both do our best to make sure that we can, empower each other to try to help build, students that are in this for the long term, well, that means that they're going to be wanting to learn for longer periods of time, which means they're going to want to be buying gear for longer periods of time, and the value of that gear is going to go up the more they do it. And it's a never-ending cycle of feeding this ecosystem. You know what I mean? I feel like the whole game is disconnected, between the internet and my mate told me this, and I went to the music shop and they said that, and my teacher told me this. It's like, no, there's too much noise, and there's too much information, and we need to listen to it all as best we can, but we definitely need to try to cultivate it for the benefit of the student. The music shop and the music teacher are the harmony, the students are the melodies to which we dance upon. That is the line I will finish you with.
We're not even going to dare follow that up with anything. That was awesome. But yeah, a very valuable thing to consider, the fact that, hey, if there was no music shops, you wouldn't have anyone being able to buy guitars and then come to you for lessons. And if we as teachers, once the music shop send us some students, if we can train them up good, get them to the point where they want to buy that next guitar, or they go and play for a bunch of people and inspire other friends and family members or little cousins or things like that to go pick up their instruments and get started. It is, as you said, it's reciprocal, it's symbiotic. You got different things living in harmony with each other, and we get to be the catalyst. And that's again tying into what we're doing here at Top Music, is trying to educate the teachers to do a better job. And I think a lot of people listening today can have a lot to think about in terms of building that relationship with their local music school and helping educate their students on better equipment, or they themselves going out and investing into more gear so they can create that awesome experience. But Simo, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the Top Music Guitar podcast. Really looking forward to the next episode, because we'll definitely have you back at some point in the future for sure. And thanks again for joining us.
Awesome. It's been truly been a pleasure chatting today. I genuinely look forward to our next conversation. I'd love to come back and talk more about this, because I think it's a huge opportunity for both parties. And as a result, all we get is more musicians, and what a better place the world would be if that was the case. So yeah, thanks for having me today, Michael. Really appreciate it.
And to all our listeners, thank you once again for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode. If you enjoy this show and want to hear more of our work, be sure to subscribe to this podcast. For links and resources mentioned in this episode, including a free ebook on how to find more guitar students, visit us at www.topmusic.co/guitar or check out the show notes. And lastly, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.